Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I mean, I liked a good horror movie, sure, and I'd heard all the usual stories growing up. Shadow figures in old houses, whispers in the night, the kind of campfire crap people tell to spook each other. But ghosts? Actual spirits clinging to this world? No, not until that night in New Orleans. I was a junior production assistant, still new to WWE, handling post-show logistics. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly making sure the right equipment got packed up, checking off lists, and staying out of the way of the real professionals. The arena was nearly empty by the time I finished my last task. Just a few janitors milling around, their voices echoing faintly in the vast space. I remember how quiet it was. Not the kind of quiet you get at home, where the hum of a refrigerator or the distant bark of a dog reminds you the world is still moving. No, this was different. This was the deep, unnatural silence of an empty place that should still be full of life. That's when I heard it. Leave this place. A voice, low and guttural, barely more than a breath against my ear. I froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The voice had come from behind me, close enough that I should have felt the warmth of someone's breath. But when I turned, there was no one there. Just the hallway, stretching endlessly in both directions, dimly lit by the overhead fluorescents that buzzed softly, flickering at odd intervals. The janitors had moved on. I was alone. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of exhaustion, a sound carried from somewhere else in the building. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and walked faster toward the exit. Then I saw him. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. He stood at the far end of the hallway, motionless, watching. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed all in black. A figure I'd seen 1,000 times before on TV, in posters, in the ring. The Undertaker. But something was wrong. His face was shrouded in darkness, just enough that I couldn't make out his features. The air around him seemed thicker, like the hallway itself was bending inwards, warping. And his eyes, Jesus, his eyes, weren't eyes at all. Just two dull, glowing orbs, like dead stars buried in his skull. He raised a hand, not quickly, slowly, deliberately, pointing straight at me. The moment he did, my chest tightened. A crushing, unbearable weight settled on my ribs, pressing in, squeezing. My breath caught, my vision blurred. It felt like something invisible had wrapped itself around me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed. All I could do was stand there, gasping like a fish out of water, the world narrowing to nothing but those pale, glowing eyes. Then, just as my vision started to darken at the edges, I heard footsteps, a security guard, rounding the corner. The second I blinked, the figure was gone. I collapsed forward, sucking in deep, desperate gulps of air. My knees nearly gave out. The security guard rushed over, grabbing my arm to steady me. "You okay, kid?" I looked past him, down the hallway. Nothing. Just the flickering lights, the silent walls. My mouth was too dry to speak. I just nodded. The guard studied me for a moment, then sighed and shook his head, like he'd seen this before. "You saw him, didn't you?" My stomach turned to ice. "Who?" I croaked, but I already knew. The guard let out a tired breath, rubbing his face. Taker always said this place had history. He glanced down the hallway, then back at me. "You just met one of its ghosts." I quit the next morning. Story 2. I was just a rookie, barely 2 weeks into my WWE developmental contract. Still getting used to the routine, early morning workouts, promo classes, learning how to take a bump without knocking the wind out of myself. That night, we had just wrapped up a house show in a smaller arena, one of those old venues with peeling paint and a smell of sweat that never quite faded. The locker room had mostly emptied. A few guys were still packing up, cracking jokes, the usual post-show energy fading into exhaustion. I stayed behind, just soaking it in. You don't realize how much you dream of something until you're standing in the middle of it. That's when I saw him, at the far end of the room, sitting on one of the old wooden benches, was a masked wrestler. I hadn't seen him in the ring that night, and his gear didn't look like anything I recognized. Old school, almost vintage. His mask was cracked leather, stitched together with thick black thread, the kind of thing that looked like it belonged in a museum. The eye holes were too big, the mouth stitched shut except for a small opening that revealed nothing but darkness inside. He was hunched over, hands clasped together, his chest rising and falling with ragged, wet breaths. I figured he was just some indie guy who had gotten a dark match, maybe trying to get noticed by the higher-ups. I know what it's like to feel like a ghost in this business, so I walked over. "Hey man, you good?" No response, just breathing, slow, rattling, like something was trapped inside his throat. A chill crept up my spine, but I told myself I was being stupid. Maybe he'd had a bad match. Maybe he was just tired. I took another step. That's when he lifted his head. His eyes weren't right. Not bloodshot. Not bruised. Just wrong. Sunken, hollow, like something was staring at me from inside the mask. Something that wasn't human. My mouth went dry. My brain screamed at me to leave, but my feet refused to move. Then he spoke. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was barely a whisper, but it crawled under my skin like ice water. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement. A fact. I took a step back, and my foot caught on something. I went down hard, my elbow smacking against the tile floor. Pain shot on my arm, but I didn't care because the moment my vision refocused, he was gone. The bench was empty. The entire locker room was empty. No masked man. No wrestlers. Nothing. The air was thick, heavy, like I had just stepped out of a dream, but the pain in my arm told me this was real. I scrambled to my feet and got out of there as fast as I could. Later that night, I pulled one of the veterans aside. He was old school, the kind of guy who had been in the business long before WWE had a performance center. I told him what I saw. His face went pale. "There's no guy with a mask like that," he muttered, rubbing his jaw like he was trying to piece something together. "Maybe he's new," I said, but even I didn't believe that. The vet shook his head. "Years ago, back before this place was even a WWE venue, there was a guy, an old school grappler, wore a stitched up leather mask, real nasty in the ring, but something was off about him. They found him right there in the locker room one night. Dead. Heart attack. Or stroke. No one really knows. Some say he died in the ring, mid-match. Some say he just stopped moving. But after that, he trailed off, eyes dark, lost in memory. After that, people started seeing him. sitting on that same bench, breathing, watching. A cold weight settled in my stomach. You're telling me I saw... The veteran cut me off. I'm telling you that if you ever see him again, don't talk to him. Don't look at him. And for God's sake, kid, don't stay in the locker room alone. I never did. Story 3. It was a small-town Texas venue. The kind of place where the scent of sweat and stale beer clung to the air like an old memory. The crowd had long since dispersed, leaving only a few workers packing up cables and sweeping the floor. I was the last one out, as usual. Part of the job. Being a referee for the smaller WWE events wasn't glamorous, but it was a foot in the door. That night, though, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the lights flickered, casting long, twitching shadows across the empty chairs. Maybe it was the way the air felt thick, like the venue was holding its breath. I had been in 100 places like this. Old buildings, their walls swollen with years of history, of cheers, of blood, of broken bones. But this place had a weight to it, something heavy pressing against the edges of my nerves. I shook it off and turned toward the exit, my footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Ding! I stopped. The sound sent a cold shiver straight through my spine. It was the ring bell. Clear, sharp, unmistakable. I turned back, swallowing hard. The timekeeper's table was empty. No one was near it. I scanned the seats, the entrance ramp, the backstage area. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the arena settling into itself. The faint buzz of a flickering light overhead. Then my eyes drifted to the ring. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, there was something there. Someone. A referee stood in the center of the ring. He wasn't supposed to be there. His striped shirt was faded, almost gray, hanging loose over his frame like it belonged to someone else. His arms dangled at his sides, limp, like a marionette waiting for its strings to be pulled. I couldn't make out his face. The shadows swallowed it whole. My heart slammed against my ribs. Hey, who's there? My voice came out too sharp, too forced. I wanted to sound like I wasn't afraid, but my body betrayed me. My fingers clenched into fists. The referee tilted his head, just slightly. The movement was unnatural, like a mannequin being nudged the wrong way. And then, he pointed at me. A single, bony finger stretched in my direction. My stomach twisted. I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to breathe. The silence was unbearable, a suffocating void pressing against my skull. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. No fading away, no slow dissolve, just nothing. The ring was empty again. I stumbled backward, my pulse a hammer in my throat. My skin was ice. I turned and ran, bolting through the exit and into the parking lot, my breath ragged and uneven. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure, that empty face, that pointed finger. The next morning, I brought it up casually, too casually, to one of the older refs over coffee. Just a harmless question, a throwaway comment. Hey man, anything weird ever happen at that venue? He looked up from his cup. His expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable, like he already knew what I was about to say. He sighed. That old place. Yeah, back in the 80s, a ref had a heart attack right in the middle of a match. Collapsed in the ring, dead before he hit the mat. I forced a laugh. You're messing with me. He shook his head. No, some say he never left. I didn't laugh after that. I still work matches. Still hear the roar of the crowd, the stomp of boots on canvas, the slap of a 3 count. But every once in a while, in an empty arena, in those quiet moments when the show is over and the lights start to dim, I swear I hear the bell ring. And sometimes when I turn back toward the ring, just for a second, I think I see a shadow standing there, waiting